What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors sits down for what should be a routine interview, only to find himself face to face with a host determined to tear him down? What happens when professionalism meets petty politics, and when celebrity courtesy crashes into calculated cruelty? Today we're diving into one of the most shocking moments in daytime television history, where Ryan Gosling, known for his calm demeanor and thoughtful responses, found himself in a verbal battleground that would end with security being called and one of the biggest names in Hollywood being escorted off set. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what you think about hosts who cross the line with their guests. Now, let's dive into what really happened that day. The morning started like any other at the View Studios in New York. Ryan Gosling had arrived early, as he always does, preparing for what his publicist had assured him would be a standard promotional interview for his latest film. The makeup team found him polite and professional, the same Ryan Gosling they'd worked with before. Behind the scenes, crew members mentioned how refreshing it was to work with someone who actually remembered their names from previous visits. But as Gosling sat in the green room, reviewing his talking points, he had no idea that Joy Behar had spent her morning differently. According to multiple sources on set, Behar had been in her dressing room scrolling through social media, working herself into what one crew member described as a frenzy over some of Gosling's recent comments about staying out of politics. When the cameras rolled and the show went live, everything seemed normal at first. Whoopi Goldberg delivered the introduction with her usual warmth, and the audience applauded enthusiastically as Gosling walked onto the set, that characteristic slight smile on his face, waving to the crowd. "Ryan Gosling, everybody," Whoopi announced, and you could hear the genuine excitement in the studio. "Thanks for being here with us." "Thanks for having me," Gosling replied, settling into his chair. "Always good to be back." Sarah Haynes jumped in first with a softball question about his latest project, and Gosling answered with his typical thoughtfulness, taking his time to give a genuine response, rather than the quick soundbites most guests deliver. "The character really challenged me in ways I didn't expect," Gosling explained. "When you're playing someone who's struggling with these internal conflicts, you have to find that truth within yourself, you know? It's not about pretending. It's about finding the real emotion." The audience was engaged, nodding along, and even the other hosts seemed genuinely interested in his answers. This was exactly the kind of interview Gosling was known for, substantive and real. But then Joy Behar spoke up. "Ryan," she said, and there was something in her tone that immediately shifted the energy in the room. "I have to ask you about your recent comments about not wanting to get political. Don't you think that's a bit of a luxury for someone in your position?" Gosling's expression remained pleasant, but if you watched closely, you could see a slight change in his posture. "Well, Joy, I think everyone has the right to choose how they use their platform. I prefer to let my work speak for itself. But isn't that just another way of saying you don't care about the issues that affect real people?" Behar pressed, her voice getting sharper. "When you have millions of followers and influence, isn't staying silent actually taking a political stance?" The other hosts exchanged glances. This wasn't the direction they had planned for the interview to go. And you could see the discomfort starting to spread across the panel. Gosling remained calm, his voice steady. "I think caring about issues and feeling obligated to broadcast your political opinions are two different things, Joy. I vote, I donate to causes I believe in. I just don't think every actor needs to become a political commentator." "So you're saying actors shouldn't use their platforms to help people understand important issues?" Behar shot back, leaning forward aggressively. "That sounds pretty selfish to me." The audience was starting to murmur. This wasn't the friendly celebrity chat they had expected, and you could feel the tension building in the studio. "I'm saying," Gosling replied, and for the first time there was a slight edge to his voice, "that maybe we should trust people to think for themselves instead of assuming they need celebrities to tell them how to vote." Behar's face flushed red. "Oh, so now you're saying we're trying to tell people how to vote? Is that what you think this show does?" Whoopi tried to step in. "Maybe we should talk about the movie." But Behar wasn't finished. "No, Whoopi, I want to hear this. Ryan thinks we're just a bunch of celebrities telling people what to think. Is that right, Ryan?" Gosling looked directly at her, and his voice remained level but firm. "Joy, I think you're putting words in my mouth. I never said anything about this show specifically. I was talking about my own choices as an actor. Your choices, Behar repeated mockingly. Your choice to stay comfortable and not risk your precious career by taking a stand on anything that matters. That's when something shifted in Gosling's demeanor. The polite smile faded completely, and he leaned back in his chair, studying Behar with new interest. Joy, he said quietly, do you actually want to talk about my movie? Or did you invite me here just to attack me? The question hung in the air like a challenge. The other hosts froze. The audience went dead silent. And for a moment, even the cameras seemed to stop moving. Joy Behar had pushed one of the most respected actors in Hollywood to his breaking point, and now everyone in that studio was about to see what happened when Ryan Gosling finally pushed back. Behar's eyes flashed with something dangerous. Instead of backing down from Gosling's direct question, she doubled down with a vengeance. Attack you? She said, her voice rising. Oh, that's rich. Poor little Ryan Gosling can't handle a few tough questions. Maybe you should stick to romantic comedies if you can't deal with real conversations. The insult hit the studio like a slap. Several audience members audibly gasped, and you could see Sarah Haynes's mouth fall open in shock. This had crossed every line of professional courtesy. Gosling sat perfectly still for a moment, then slowly nodded. There it is, he said, his voice calm, but carrying a weight that made everyone lean in. You know, Joy, I came here to talk about a film that deals with some pretty heavy themes. Mental health, family trauma, finding hope in dark places, real issues that affect real people. But instead, you want to turn this into some kind of political ambush. I'm asking legitimate questions, Behar snapped back. If you can't handle that, maybe you shouldn't be doing interviews. Legitimate questions? Gosling's eyebrows raised. Joy, you just insulted my entire career and called me selfish for not being political enough for your taste. In what world is that journalism? Whoopi tried again to regain control. Okay, let's take a breath here and maybe... No, Whoopi, Behar interrupted, her voice getting louder. I'm tired of these Hollywood pretty boys coming on our show thinking they can just smile their way through without taking any real positions on anything important. Ryan here thinks he's too good to get his hands dirty with politics. Gosling leaned forward now, his composure cracking for the first time. Too good? Joy? I've never said I was too good for anything. I said I prefer to keep my political views private. There's a difference between having principles and performing them for cameras. Performing? Behar's voice was getting shrill now. So now you're saying everyone who speaks out about injustice is just performing? Is that what you think of us? I think, Gosling said, his voice dropping to just above a whisper, but somehow carrying more power than shouting, that some people confuse being loud with being right. The studio went dead silent. Even the crew members who had been moving around quietly stopped in their tracks. Joy Behar's face went from red to purple. Excuse me? She said, standing up from her chair. Did you just call me loud? Gosling remained seated, perfectly calm. I said some people confuse being loud with being right. If you think that applies to you, well, that's between you and your conscience. My conscience? Behar was practically shouting now. My conscience is just fine, thank you very much. I sleep well at night knowing I use my platform to fight for people who don't have a voice. And I respect that, Gosling replied evenly. But respect works both ways, Joy. You can fight for your causes without attacking people who choose to fight for theirs differently. Behar slammed her palm down on the table, making everyone jump. Different? Different is one thing. Cowardice is another. That did it. For the first time since the interview began, Ryan Gosling's famous composure completely shattered. He stood up slowly, his face hardening into an expression none of the hosts had ever seen before. Cowardice, he repeated, his voice low and dangerous. Joy, you want to talk about cowardice? Let's talk about it. You invited me here under the pretense of discussing my work, then ambushed me with political attacks because you disagree with my personal choices. You've insulted my character, my career, and now my integrity. And you call that brave? The other hosts were frozen in place. Sunny Hostin looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair. Alyssa Farah Griffin was staring at the table. This had gone so far beyond a normal interview that nobody knew how to respond. "I call that holding you accountable," Behar shot back, but for the first time there was uncertainty in her voice. "Accountable for what?" Gosling demanded. "For choosing not to turn every interview into a political rally? For believing that maybe, just maybe, people can watch a movie without needing to know exactly how the lead actor votes? For using your privilege to stay comfortable while the rest of us do the heavy lifting," Behar replied, but the fire was going out of her voice, as she seemed to realize how far this had escalated. Gosling shook his head slowly. "Joy, you don't know anything about my life outside of what you read in tabloids. You don't know what causes I support privately, what conversations I have with my family, what I teach my kids about right and wrong. You've decided that because I don't perform my politics for your entertainment, I must not have any principles at all. That's not what Behar started, but Gosling wasn't finished. "And you know what the really sad part is?" he continued, his voice gaining strength. "We probably agree on most things. But instead of having a conversation, instead of trying to understand why someone might choose a different approach than yours, you decided to make me your enemy. You turned what could have been a meaningful discussion into a public humiliation attempt." The camera operators were getting signals from the control room, but nobody knew whether to keep rolling or cut away. This was unprecedented television, but it was also completely out of control. Behar seemed to realize she had lost the room completely. The audience, which had been murmuring disapprovingly at her behavior, was now openly uncomfortable. Even her fellow hosts were distancing themselves, their body language screaming their desire to be anywhere else. "I was just trying to," she began weakly. "You were trying to score points," Gosling cut her off. "You were trying to make yourself look tough and principled by tearing down someone who wasn't even fighting back. Until now." He started walking toward the edge of the set, then turned back to face her. "You know what, Joy? You want to talk about using platforms responsibly? Maybe start by using yours to build people up instead of tearing them down. Maybe try having conversations instead of conducting interrogations. Maybe remember that the people you're talking to are human beings, not political props." Behar's face was now a mix of anger and something that looked suspiciously like shame. "You can't talk to me like that," she said, but there was no conviction left in her voice. "Actually," Gosling replied, "I think I just did." The silence that followed was deafening. For a moment, it seemed like the entire studio had forgotten how to breathe. Then Joy Behar's face twisted into something ugly, and she turned toward the wings of the set. "Get him out of here," she called out, her voice cracking with rage. "Security! Get him off my stage!" Gosling stood there, completely calm now, watching her with what could only be described as pity. "Your stage?" he said quietly. "Joy, this isn't your stage. This is supposed to be a place for conversations, not whatever this was." "I said get him out!" Behar screamed, and now the desperation was clear in her voice. She had lost control completely, and everyone in the studio could see it. Whoopi finally found her voice. "Joy, maybe we should just take a commercial break and—" "No," Behar snapped, whirling on her co-host. "This is exactly the problem. Everyone wants to just smooth things over instead of calling out bad behavior when they see it." Gosling let out a short, bitter laugh. "Bad behavior? Joy, take a look around. Look at your co-hosts. Look at your audience. Look at your crew. Everyone in this room knows who displayed bad behavior today, and it wasn't me." He was right. Sarah Haynes had tears in her eyes from the second-hand embarrassment. Sunny Hostin was staring at her hands like she wished she could disappear. The audience members were shifting uncomfortably in their seats, many of them looking genuinely upset by what they had witnessed. Even the usually unflappable camera operators seemed shaken by the display. But Behar was too far gone to see any of it. "You think you can come on here and lecture me about how to do my job?" she snarled. "You think your little speeches make you some kind of hero?" "I think," Gosling replied with devastating calm, "that someone needed to tell you the truth about how you've been treating people. And clearly, nobody else around here has the courage to do it." That hit home. You could see it in the way the other hosts flinched. in the way some of the crew members nodded, almost imperceptibly. This wasn't the first time Behar had gone too far, and everyone knew it. Security guards were finally approaching the set, looking uncertain about what exactly they were supposed to do. One of them, clearly uncomfortable with the situation, approached Gosling hesitantly. "Sir, we're going to have to ask you to leave," the guard said, and you could hear the reluctance in his voice. Gosling nodded politely at the man. "Of course, I understand you're just doing your job." He looked back at the panel one more time. "Whoopi, Sarah, Sunny, Alyssa, it was good to see you all again. I'm sorry this didn't go differently." Then he turned to face Joy Behar directly, and his voice carried to every corner of the studio. "Joy, I hope someday you figure out the difference between being passionate about your beliefs and being cruel to people who don't share them exactly the way you do. There's a way to fight for what you believe in without becoming the very thing you claim to be fighting against." Behar's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. For once in her life, she seemed to have no comeback, no snappy retort, no way to deflect from the truth of what he was saying. You can't just," she stammered. "I can't what, Joy? Tell the truth? Point out that you've spent the last 20 minutes trying to humiliate a guest for having the audacity to disagree with you? Call out the fact that you've turned what should have been a professional interview into a personal attack?" He started walking toward the exit, then paused and spoke without turning around. "You know what's really sad about all this? We could have had a real conversation about the role of celebrity in politics. We could have explored different perspectives, and maybe even learned something from each other. Instead, you chose to make it about power and dominance, and who could hurt who the most." He finally turned back, and his voice was filled with genuine sadness. "I feel sorry for you, Joy. I really do. Because, somewhere along the way, you forgot that the people sitting across from you are human beings with feelings and dignity, not just targets for your anger." With that, he walked off the set, flanked by security guards who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else in the world. The silence he left behind was thick enough to cut with a knife. Whoopi tried desperately to salvage the situation. "Well, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with." But her voice was shaking, and everyone could see the strain on her face. This wasn't just an interview gone wrong. This was a complete meltdown, broadcast live to millions of people. As the cameras finally cut away for commercial, you could hear Behar's voice, no longer the confident, combative tone she'd maintained during the confrontation, but something small and defensive. "He had no right to talk to me like that," she said to no one in particular. "This is my show. I have every right to ask hard questions." But the damage was done, and everyone in that studio knew it. The other hosts were silent, the audience was uncomfortable, and even the crew members were shaking their heads as they went about their work. Ryan Gosling had walked onto that set as a guest promoting his latest film. He walked off as something else entirely, someone who had finally said what everyone else in Hollywood had been thinking but was too polite or too scared to say out loud. And Joy Behar? She sat at that desk, surrounded by co-hosts who could barely look at her, facing an audience that had just watched her reveal exactly who she really was, when someone dared to stand up to her. The question everyone was asking as the show limped through the rest of its time slot was simple: who had really been kicked off that stage? The guest who maintained his dignity while speaking truth to power, or the host who had so completely lost control that she had to call security to silence someone who was holding up a mirror to her own behavior? What do you think? Was Ryan Gosling right to finally push back against Joy Behar's aggressive tactics, or should guests always just smile and take whatever hosts dish out? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories about the moments when Hollywood's biggest stars show us who they really are behind the cameras.